Welcome to Leadership Reimagined. I'm your host, Cassie Crosby. Today, I'm talking with Julie Anderson, former ad agency CEO, TEDx speaker on creativity, and now an executive coach. Julie has spent her career helping leaders think differently about how ideas are generated, shaped, and brought to life. We're exploring what creativity actually is, why it matters for leadership today, and why it's not just reserved for a select few. Hi, Julie. I'm super excited for the conversation today and so glad you agreed to this.
Hi, Cassie. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So, just to get everybody started, let's talk
Mm.
a little bit about how you got here today.
Well, as you said in the intro, I had the privilege of working for over 35 years in a creative industry of advertising. And I saw teams every day under pressure, on the hook to continually come up with new ideas. And from that, sort of what I call the front row seat of observing it, I started to see some patterns. I started to see when it was fun, when it was easy, and when it was difficult, and when it was hard, and what were the conditions that were surrounding those teams in those moments that made it either joyful and flowy and a lot of great ideas, or people were getting stuck and it just never got traction. And I thought, to be able to look at it at a meta level and take all of those years of working in the industry and to provide some very tangible actions that people can take from the advertising industry to everyday life could be a really valuable thing. And so that's what I've been doing.
Very cool. Yeah. And I was first introduced to your work when we were going through Georgetown training, and you shared, we were in the same peer group, and you shared your TEDx. And I've
Mhm.
just always been so impressed. And I remember your very funny story about that TEDx talk. But I'm curious, if you could share with everybody when you think about creativity, like what are we really talking about? How are you defining creativity?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the most important questions because I think a lot of people have an idea of what it means.
Mhm.
And based on what people think it means, I think there's a series of consequences. If we think it is, for example, reserved for artists, people in the creative industries, people who, look really funky and live sort of alternative lives and, are in Brooklyn with a kiln, if we have this sort of stereotype of a creative person, we're likely to say, well, that's not me. And when it's not me, then it's not a topic that I think about. It's not something I value. And it sort of just goes by the wayside. So I think my definition of creativity is less focused on the output. So if you look at traditional in academic circles or even in the dictionary, often the definitions are focused on what is created so that there is an object or an outcome, and that creativity is the process by which something is created. Great. My observation from the years of advertising and the years of watching people wrestle with what does it take to come up with something had me realize that it's actually more than just about the output, and that for me the real energy and possibility around it is looking at it as a mindset. So the idea that it is a potential, creativity is a way of seeing the world where curiosity and open-mindedness lead to new things. It could be objects, it could be ideas, it could be solutions, it could be expressions. It doesn't necessarily have to be limited to, I think, in business circles, what we think of as innovation, where we're going to invent a new product, but just a new way of thinking, responding, behaving. So my definition is that creativity is the potential. I think that's an important word I'll come back to see and engage in the world in an open and curious way that then will lead to something new, a new idea, a new solution, new expression. So I wanted to just shine a light on that word potential because I do believe everyone has it, that it lives within all of us. And yes, that kooky person in Brooklyn who's doing really wild, fascinating, creative work may be the ultimate expression of it, but that it lives in all of us is evidenced by any preschool or kindergarten classroom.
Mm.
If you look at the wall, everybody's got a picture up. So at some point, we made decisions, we got feedback that told us maybe you should steer away from the visual arts, right? That's okay. But I think what happens is a lot of people shut down creativity altogether. So my evidence for my hypothesis is look at children.
Mhm.
And it is in all children. It's there. It is a potential. We just need to take some actions to realize the potential.
Yeah. So I don't know if it makes me kooky, but I did make this in a kiln.
I love that.
Lovely neighbor has a kiln, which is just fantastic.
Think of yourself as creative.
I actually do. I've always been somewhat more on that like creative side of things. I was always a writer and spent a lot of time daydreaming and thinking of, interesting things. And my grandmother was very creative and did a lot of artsy type stuff. So in the very traditional artsy sense, yes.
Mhm.
And my kids are very creative. So we have quite a creative family. That's not a block for me.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Because I think the question, do you think of yourself as creative, is one of the most important starting points for this
Yeah.
conversation. It's what I asked the 1,000 people in the audience at the TED Talk was, show of hands. How many of you think you're creative? And it was probably a third put their hands up.
Wow.
So that tells me that 2/3 of those people are living with something they don't know they have.
Mhm.
And when we think about the world we're living in and the need for solutions and ideas, what an enormous waste of human potential that is.
Yeah.
So you're lucky that you own it, but many people listening to this might still be thinking, yeah, but that's not me.
Yeah. What do you think people are misunderstanding about themselves or about what it means to be creative?
I think it does go back to that stereotypic picture we have,
Mhm.
and that we associate it with a thing we're not. Even in advertising, I have to tell you, the industry in a traditional agency, there are departments, right? Like in any big
Right. Sure.
corporate structure. And there's a creative department. And then there's an account management department and a strategic planning department and a media department. So what does that suggest? What I realized is that suggests that the people who sit in the creative department are the creative people
Mhm.
and everybody else is not.
Mhm.
And that's the flaw, I believe, that even in the industry there I spent so much time, there was this differentiation that I think limited the rest of the agency's ability. Now, yes, the people in the creative department bear enormous pressure. They are the ones on the
Yeah.
hook all the time. But for the rest of us to shut that off because we don't have the title, I think is one of those things that contributes to just not paying attention to it. I don't think it's a conscious thing, Cassie, that people say, well, I'm not creative. It just kind of goes away.
Yeah.
As life goes on and you learn in school and you get rewarded for being really analytical and good with numbers, okay, then you're really good at that and you follow that path. But the other just sort of withers. I don't think it's necessarily intentional that it goes
Yeah.
away.
Well, why does it matter? Why does it matter whether I think of myself as someone who's creative or not?
I think it matters because it is this potential
Mhm.
that when it's realized in some manner on a very basic level, it could be fun. It can provide some joy, right? There's just because if you think about it, I'm sure making that necklace was joyful.
Yeah.
Right? So it now again, I will call that a traditional creative act because you did make an object, right? But I think there's joy. There's also been research that shows that engaging in some sort of creativity diminishes and reduces anxiety.
Mhm.
So when there's stress, I also believe I have some personal experience with this, that in the face of when in the face of an obstacle or a difficulty or a challenge, creativity contributes to resilience and contributes to an ability to meet some of those things head on. I'll give you an example. My mom has been struggling with dementia.
Mhm.
And one night she called and she said, I don't know what to do. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, it's nighttime. I don't know what to do. I said, well, just put your pajamas on and go to bed. And she said, pajamas. And I could tell that the word had lost its meaning for her.
Mhm.
And she got more anxious. She said, what's that? I said, well, it's what you wear to sleep. She's like, And we couldn't get to it. So I remember thinking, I know. All of her clothes are black, white, and gray. I'm her daughter, as you can see. I'm going to order on Amazon some hot pink pajamas. And they arrived the next day. And when she called me that night and said, I don't know what to do, I said, put on the pink. Because the word pajamas didn't have meaning, but she knew pink. I'm using that as an example of a creative way to address an everyday situation that is one of the values to your question of why does it matter? I'm sure I could have also handled it in other ways. It's not to say that's the only one, but that was available to me, I think, because I consider and I pay attention to cultivating my own creative muscles so that when there's a need, the solutions do show up. And that's one of the most important things that the research I'm doing on the topic has had me realize is if we attend to our creativity, if we give voice to it, we acknowledge first that we have it. Step one, yeah, I'm a creative person. Step two, and then step three, what do I do to keep that muscle in shape? I use the muscle analogy because it's the simplest one for most people. Now, we all have biceps, but unless we use them, they don't grow. You know this, right?
Sure.
So I think that's the why do it. So it's there when you need it is the simple answer.
Yeah, and some of that innovative problem solving, which I can easily see that transition from like solving a problem in your family to, well, now I'm in the workplace, but I'm still able to tap into that same amount of creativity. And curious, in your mind, what makes creativity so essential when we're thinking about leadership?
Well, I think particularly now, I mean, you don't need me to comment on the world we're living in, right? I think creativity is the perfect antidote to many of the things that leaders are facing because how we used to do it solutions are no longer effective. So by definition, we need to create something new. We need to create, right? So whether it's a new way to come up with a go-to-market strategy, a new organizational structure to support more ambiguity, a way for teams to feel safe in experimenting and trying things. I think leaders who cultivate and value creativity in themselves and in their culture will have more ideas flowing in their organization, and they'll also have happier people. Because what I've discovered when I talk to people about being creative is when they have a moment, and I'll often say there's sort of two clues to the fact to when and where you might be creative. And that one of them is that like that moment, like I know how I'm going to set up the backyard for my kid's birthday party. Like I just figured it out. Like I didn't know what to do. Or I know how to develop a new org structure that cuts my staff by 20%. I mean, it can be business related things, or it could be something as simple as setting the yard up for the party. But we all, I think, have that a muscle memory of that, right? That moment. It's like a rush. It's literally a chemical rush. And without getting too nerdy about brain science, there is something that is happening chemically in that moment. A new synapse is actually being formed, and that's what produces that rush. So often people think of that as an accident. It's when they're in the shower, walking the dog, chopping the vegetables. It's not usually when people are attending to the question. And again, there is a neurological reason that when we step away from a particular challenge, we are able then to have new connections form. So I think that feeling is something that becomes self-fulfilling in the sense that I want more of that. And leaders who can bring those moments for people will have happier people, because those are good days. Those are the good days in the office when you figured out the thing.
Yeah. And you talked about the ad agency and how it was still sort of separated by different departments, but I'm curious just from a sort of more tactical for people who might have trouble really conceptualizing what we mean here. So say like the finance department or, one of these other, how is creativity showing up in leadership in these other ways?
Well, certainly we don't ever want to have too much creativity in accounting, right? Because that can get us into
Some things are finite.
But I would say, because I've worked with accountants on this, the creative storytelling around the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, you are going to follow the rules of accounting in reporting the P&L for the year. The narrative around it, the way you talk about it to the board, the way it's connected to the strategic growth initiatives. Because we are endeavoring to, grow our B2B, business to business side of our practice, we therefore have numbers that look like this. Over here, that's where creativity comes in, even to someone who's in finance. So it's an ability to see the thing, whatever the thing is, in a new way. So you've got the spreadsheet and it's done correctly and following all the right rules, but what story is it telling, and what conclusions do we want to be drawing from it is where the creativity can come in. So there's really opportunities for creativity in virtually, I haven't come up with a job in my mind where I think, nope, there's no creativity there. Now you could say even in surgery, yes, there's a way to do the surgery, to get the appendix out, right?
Right.
Something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, that surgeon is having to call upon something that has them deal with the unexpected. And I'm calling that their creativity.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of Grey's Anatomy, so I'm right with you.
See it.
Yeah, I could see it. Yeah. So one thing I was going to say is that I often meet with people who, right, to your point, like maybe they're really good at the numbers or they really are good at that analysis, but it's really that strategic messaging, putting the story together, making the meaning behind it. And I think that's what I hear you saying is that like there's really a place in the workplace for creativity behind some of that meaning making and storytelling and moving the strategic narrative forward.
And I think now that I think about it, because numbers are a great place to look, because there's the impression that there's not a lot of creativity there. I can think of an example, even in the way the numbers are used. So narrative is one, and it's narrative and storytelling. But if we're looking at the health of a business and we're looking at a P&L, yes, we can look at the bottom line profit, but there are also other numbers that comprise a P&L sheet. Our profit right now is behind where we were last year. And if that's the only thing we're looking at, we're going to draw one conclusion about the health of the business. But if we take a more creative look, more deeply, and we see actually our recurring revenue from existing clients is higher than it has been in past years. And that speaks to a certain kind of health of the business, that maybe where we're losing is in our pursuit of new business. We measure what matters. We look at the numbers to tell us the story that we're looking to tell, but we can also look at the same numbers with a different lens and tell a different story. So that's another example.
So when you meet with people and they say to you, I don't really think I'm that creative, where do you start?
I start with the reflection of, think of a time where you had a great idea.
Yeah.
Or another way in is, think of a time where you were in what they call a flow state. I may not use that language if people don't understand it, but I might say when you were so engaged in what you were doing that you lost a sense of time, that the rest of the world ceased. So that's called the flow state. And it's often very much associated with an act of some sort of creative endeavor. So either you had that little eureka moment and you remember that, or that experience of being lost. That's where I start. Say, okay, that tells me, and hopefully tells the person, that you have it within you. So that's the first step. And then the next step is to realize that it isn't an accident. Because I think even some of the mythology around creativity, the idea of a muse, that some people are just visited and gifted. Yes, of course, like with any skill or any talent, there are going to be the people who are exceptional at it. Not everybody plays basketball like LeBron, but anyone can throw a ball. So same thing with creativity. And I think recognizing that it's possible, and then owning, all right, I guess I am creative. Now what?
Mm-hmm.
How do I make it not an accident where it just seems like it was a lucky day? And that's really the second and important piece of the work that I'm doing, is to help give people some structure and agency over cultivating their creativity.
Yeah. And what becomes possible when people are able to do that? Or what's
I,
different?
I
Yeah.
think it's access.
Yeah.
So in those moments where there's a challenge, an obstacle, your mom doesn't know what pajamas are, whatever it is,
Oh,
in those moments, the ideas are just a little more available. And so there's the focused time of my boss gave me a challenge, and that's what I would call intentional creativity. I sit down, I think, all right, I have to come up with something. Sometimes I'll even say, like, we do with kids, put on your thinking cap, put on your
yeah.
creativity cap, and imagine giving yourself permission, like, what would a creative person do? Even if you don't think you are that, imagine that crazy person that's in your mind. What might they do in this moment that you wouldn't? And even asking that, it's like playfully, like, well, a crazy person, a creative person would do this.
Yeah.
So I think those are a couple of ways that it helps. So either intentionally trying to solve something, or having it available when a challenge takes us by surprise.
So is it as easy as just like accepting that I'm creative? I just need to think I'm creative. I'll have all of these ideas, or are there some, daily habits or practices? I know there's a lot of different things out there that, like the artist way and things like that. But in this sense, this business sense of creativity, what are some habits and things that people can do to help
Yeah, I
unlock better
think
thinking?
I think it would be nice if it were just, okay, I'm accepting your hypothesis, Julie. Let it
Sure.
flow, right? But we have to put some skin in the game, I think, for that really to happen. And going back to the muscle metaphor, it's the easiest way to think about it, right? If we want to develop a muscle, we go to the gym and work on it.
Mhm.
So the good news, though, I think, is this is an easy thing to work on, to work out, that doesn't necessarily require an enormous amount of time. So, sort of like, I think of it almost as the fourth leg of the stool of, health. So just like if there's eating, we eat well, there's exercise, there's sleep, and I think there is attending to our creativity. An example of how that can be done without adding to the to-do list is something as simple as, when you're in the grocery store, look for something you've never seen before.
Mhm.
You're there already. And because most of us, we know where to go, we grab what we grab. 80% of the stuff in the basket is the same each time we go. But if we say, I'm going to look and find something I have never seen before, and then maybe buy it.
Mhm.
Or that far. I did it with vegetables for a while when I was, my son was little. Like, let's find a new vegetable that looks really weird,
Yeah.
but you can do it at any part of the store. But just the flip, what happens in the brain is then you are asking your brain to look for something new, instead of the repeatable patterns and habits that we're in, which serve us, but are the opposite of creativity.
Yeah.
So looking for something I've never seen before. Same thing, it can happen walking to your car in the parking lot. Or, I mean, I live in New York City, so it's easy because there's always something new going on around here. Just walking to the subway. But, let's say you live in the suburbs and you drive to work, and maybe drive a different route.
Mhm.
Or maybe turn on the noticing part of your brain, and tell it to notice something that you haven't seen before. So these are very subtle ways of signaling to our brains and opening up different avenues, so that then they're sort of, oh, okay, I'm on my way to work. It's almost like a warm up. So it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily take more time, but it does take intention. Now, that said, those are some of the easy, not time consuming ways. Then there are some more intentional ways. Same, again, going back to the gym, you can do some simple sit-ups watching TV, or you can go to the gym and use some machines and work harder. So if you want to work harder, I have a sort of a little model that suggests to people to build their sort of their workout plan. So just like if you went to the gym and you say, well, I want to work on my lats, I want to work on my my hamstrings, and you would use the machines and put together the program that works for you. With creativity, there are sort of realms that I think are places that can source new thinking. So one is certainly social.
Mm-hmm.
Who are people that when you are talking to them, you find yourself thinking differently just because of who they are? It's one of the reasons I love talking to you. Whenever we have a conversation, I'd click off the Zoom and I've had a new thought. So there are people, there's a gentleman that his name is Greg, and he and I have a once a month Zoom for an hour, and we don't have an agenda. We just know that when we are together, ideas happen. And we show up. So, how are you? Good. How are you? What's going on? It is never a waste of time.
Yeah.
So finding those people and being intentional about choosing time with them. I also think, so that's the sort of social. There is a physical, I think, realm as well. Walking sounds so simple, but there's science that shows when we are walking, it gives rest to a certain part of the brain that allows the part of the brain where ideas emerge to be a little bit more available. So walking, moving our bodies also helps this create some flow. Then there's intellectual. Like, what are the things intellectually that stimulate us? Some people are visual. They like museums, or they like reading, or, other people, it's being quiet. It's closing off the visual and listening, or finding different kinds of podcasts that you wouldn't usually listen. So some of these, again, it's on the drive to work. It's choose differently to provide a little more fuel for these other parts of the brain. So we've got sort of social, intellectual, physical, sensory, can be another way to tune in. And what we're doing with all of these is we're encouraging the natural flow. What I've learned about the neuroscience behind this is we have to make space and time, because when we're focused and on task and getting stuff off our to-do list, that's all critically important. But that is not the part of the brain where the new ideas come from.
Yeah.
So we need to choose some way to say, okay, we're going to quiet that for a little bit so that these other things can happen. So that's an example of some practices that hopefully don't feel burdensome and like, oh, I have to go, do this too. But just, find something new in the grocery store.
Well, and it's not lost on me that all of these activities you mentioned also have a way of bringing you to the present moment and making you very active in that presence and sort of practicing. Whether you're looking for something new, that means you're very present, you're there, your mind is active, you're searching or doing some of these intellectual tasks, what have you. I mean, I see a very big parallel between like executive presence and the ability to step out of that constant productivity checklist, doing all the things that really, don't improve our thinking. They get things done, but they're not improving our thinking or really moving the ball forward, you know?
Yeah, it's funny. Again, here it is. You say something and it gives me no idea. Like, I think even executive presence, I suppose it's just, it could be a pun, but presence, not executive presence in the way we think of it, like you just said, but the being present, I think is the point you're making, which has a different energetic quality to it.
Totally.
And I don't think we honor that enough and appreciate that it's not an indulgence and a luxury
Right.
to look out the window for 5 minutes and daydream. It's actually healthy. But I think we're so accustomed to measuring ourselves on how much we do that we don't make time for that kind of practicing.
I agree with you completely. I mean, a lot of the work that I do, I know some of the work you do is right, like helping leaders find that space, right? Much of the work you do, I imagine, is helping leaders create that space, create that permission structure, right? Allowing themselves to get out of the fray and just be able to think clearly, which is such a big part of it.
I mean, I think that's the thing, unlike, if you're adhering to a high fiber diet or something that you have to do, like, there is joy in this endeavor as well. So, it has practical application, but I think if we're not attached to the outcome, to the quality of the outcome, to the opinions of others about that. We're just in the experience of being curious, the what if question, without worrying what comes, like just in, like to your point, the presence of, I don't know. We're not allowed, most leaders are not allowed to not know. They're expected to know. So if they're expected to know, then by definition, their creativity is being limited, because creativity is the space of not knowing.
Mm.
You can't be creative if you already know, because then you already know. So you
Sure.
have to. So, but that's for some people, that's a little bit of a mind bendy concept that I have to accept, and more than accept, appreciate, value not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
These are challenging concepts for leaders who are on the hook to their boards and, to have the answers to everything. But I think we forget that job one, or step one rather, in being open to creativity is to not think we have the answers to everything.
Well, I think that's a great place to put a pin in this, put a bow on it, I guess. Wow, this has been a fantastic conversation. And I think it's just so enlightening to think about creativity and how it applies to our daily lives as leaders. And then again, like what we can do differently to really flex that muscle so that it's there when we need it, right? So it's on
Yeah,
tap when you don't know, when you're in that space of not knowing.
right. That's when it's particularly valuable. I think of it as like, the pink pajama moment, when we're
Yeah.
called on to, oh boy, this is a new challenge.
Yeah.
Whew, thankfully, those things show up. So
Yeah. And I'm sure people are going to be interested in your work and where to follow you. So where's the best place to find you, Julie?
LinkedIn is the best place to find me. I'm
Okay.
Julie Halpert Anderson on LinkedIn.
It's been a fantastic conversation.
Thanks, Cassie. Love talking to you. The ideas flow.
They do.